Hello and welcome to part 3 of Anatomy and Kinesiology with Training Made Fun. My name is Mark Baines, and once again I will be your presenter. Make sure you've reviewed the 15-minute videos for parts 1 and 2 for Anatomy and Kinesiology before going into this one, because it'll make a whole lot more sense and it'll be a lot more helpful. That said, we are now referring to or speaking about the sliding filament theory as it comes to muscular contraction. When a muscle contracts, what you essentially have is hundreds or thousands of these little myosin-type heads, as shown in this picture here, this golf club-like head-looking thing that pulls on these actin strands. And what's happening as that's occurring is the muscle is shortening. As the myosin heads pull on the actin strands, the muscle shortens. All these fibers pull over the top of one another, stacking on top of one another, making it look like the muscle's gotten larger, when in fact all that's happened is all these fibers are stacking on top of one another, helping the muscle produce force. So when the muscle contracts during the concentric action of muscular activation, you have these myosin heads pulling on these actin strands. And in this little picture here, seeing a little bit of the biochemistry of what's going on here. The ATP, that little green ball on the side of that myosin head, you notice it splits off there just as that myosin head hits the actin strand. That's because that stroke right there, when that myosin head grabs that actin strand, without ATP, adenosine triphosphate, the basic unit of energy for the body, there is no muscular contraction. If the body is not getting enough of the right foods, there's not going to be any possibility of muscular contraction, let alone if you don't rest long enough between bouts of significant exercise for a given muscle fiber, you're not going to have enough sufficient ATP to perform the exercise. So a lot of things that go into that. That comes more into program design, little in nutrition, right? That said, here, this muscular contraction, when the muscle contracts, when you shorten the muscle, for a single joint muscle, like the biceps brachii, pulling that, or really biceps brachii is actually is one joint, but the origin's on more than one bone. But referring more to the elbow specifically, for the elbow activation of that biceps brachii, your biceps are going to be strongest about mid-range. You're going to have fully lengthening when that muscle in the arm is straight, and fully shortening when you bend that elbow as much as you possibly can. The muscle is going to be at its strongest in mid-range, or about mid-range. That said, that is your strength curve. Your basic strength profile or strength curve is, for a single joint muscle, you're going to be strongest about mid-range as far as production of force, or handling of force, if you will. For that reason, there is absolutely no reason to try to add more load at the beginning range or ending range so that you make it more difficult at the beginning or the end than in the middle. You want the middle to be most difficult because that is where you're strongest. As you get stronger, the middle will still be your strongest point, and you'll still be weaker at end range or at full shortening when it comes to handling external load, whether that be to move it, to hold it in place, or from the standpoint of slowing it down. That's where you have the greatest ability to produce force. Don't confuse mechanical advantage from the standpoint of the lever system moving, whereby you get basically the load closer to you. It's going to make it easier. Farther from you, it's going to make it tougher. There's a lot of factors that go into this. But that said, the muscle itself is strongest mid-range. Your job in designing exercise is to try to find a way to make the exercise, when performing loaded exercises, make it most difficult when you're going for hypertrophy or maximal strength, to make it most difficult at the mid-range. Okay, that's the primary goal. That said, this actin-myosin cross-bridging, this is what's going on for the sliding filament theory, whereby muscular contraction occurs. Okay, a muscle fiber is either on or it's not. If it's on, it's on. When your type 1 muscle fibers are on, your type 2A muscle fibers are on, your type 2X, also referred to as type 2B, but type 2X muscle fibers, when those fibers are on, of those 3 basic muscle fibers, when they're on, they're on. There's no dimmer switch. There's no reason to assume that we need to go partial range of motion in a given joint motion. You should assume that you should try to go full range of motion, whatever is reasonable for the person's biomechanical limitations, their structure, their needs, but there's no reason to shorten up range of motion for purposes of trying to hit different aspects of a fiber. You can't do that. Fiber's on or it's not. It's just that simple. That's good news. Simpler is better, right? The actin strand versus the myosin filaments, these little sections here, the H zone, the A band, the I band, the Z line. Don't concern yourself at this point with that. Like all information, it's good information, but for the short term, probably too much trying to to digest at this point in time. Just get the basic idea of what's happening with muscular contraction, the myosin heads pulling on the actin, sliding filament theory, whereby you're producing muscular force as ATP hits that myosin head and separates into ADP. If the inorganic phosphate, that myosin head grabs that actin strand, creating this pulling action whereby the muscle fibers slide over the top of one another, looking like the muscle's getting bigger to produce more force. Okay? And that said, parts to the muscle. As far as parts of the muscle go, the muscle goes. Muscular origin is the point where the muscle begins. Whatever bone the muscle begins from, that's the origin. It'll insert someplace else. It'll, like the biceps brachii, it will start in the humerus, originate or begin in the humerus, also a part of the scapula, and it inserts into, for the biceps brachii, into the radius. And it actually can pull the radius into supination, can open it up a little bit, as well as bend the elbow into elbow flexion, as well as actually, because of its attachment or the origin at the scapula, can actually be involved in the flexion of the shoulder of the arm going forward and up. Okay, a lot of things the biceps brachii is actually involved in that respect. That said, the insertion point will always pull toward the origin. So when you know your basic anatomy, which is a long-term thing, you're not going to get it all at once. When you understand your basic anatomy, when someone tries to tell you that a muscle does a certain thing, you can think, well, if it begins here and ends this place, it's going to pull this direction. How could it possibly do what they're saying? And beyond that, when someone talks a lot about how a muscle fiber configuration occurs, whereby a muscle's fan-shaped, or it's a pennate muscle or bipennate or whatever it is, that's fine and good to know, but at the same time, we have to take into account the effect on the joint. The effect on that joint capsule, all the connective tissue, the bone on bone or bone with connective tissue playing a role, or discs or bursa-filled discs and the fluid, how it plays a role with lifting of weights. You can't just say, if I move this way, it works this muscle, now we're good. It's much deeper than that. The rabbit hole goes a lot deeper. We have to know a lot more about this when people are paying us to take care of them, or when we're really trying to take care of our own body. Once you know better, you've got to be more intelligent about what you do, right? That said, as far as connective tissue goes, we talked briefly in part 2 about fascia, connective tissue, tendons attaching muscle to bone, and ligaments attaching bone to bone, how none of those things can produce force. They cannot produce force. They can handle force. The tendon has to be able to transmit force from the muscle to the from the bone, from the muscle trying to pull on the bone, right? Has to be able to transmit that force to get the motion to occur. But technically, the production of force is only the muscle. The only active components of muscular contraction are the actin and myosin filaments of your muscle fibers. Passive components of muscular contraction is your connective tissue. Connective tissue takes much longer to adapt to stress. You've got to give it more time. You've got to go with lower loads initially, probably longer periods perhaps. A short rest is fine as long as the person can pursue. This is a real simple rule. How do we know if we've rested long enough? Well, if you can perform the next set as well or better than the one before it. And over the next 48 to 72 hours, you don't have any ill effects to the joints, to how you feel. If that's going okay for 3 sessions or more, then we're probably okay to consider progressing it more by shortening the rest and whatnot. That's more in the program design. We'll talk more about that. That said, a little more application to this. Going to the roles of muscles. When you contract a muscle, like the arm curl for elbow flexion, for bending of the elbow, pulling of humerus, or the forearm, toward the humerus, the prime mover would be your biceps brachii, your brachioradialis, your brachialis, all possibly playing a role there. And the assistant movers. Well, you shouldn't have a lot of assistant movers. Probably do, because no one's going to be perfect with only moving the elbow and absolutely nothing else. Don't mistake that with it being okay to get your hips moving a little bit into that arm curl, or the shoulders start throwing into it, or the head to go back and start using your spine, bending your knees and straightening your knees while doing it. A lot of people do that because the weight gets too heavy. It's real simple. The weight's too heavy for you. If you can't just stand still and only bend the elbow and not move something else, weight's too heavy for you. And that's okay. You can be really strong, lifting 25, 30, 35 pounds for reps, and you are really strong. If you can take a 25 or 30 or 35 pound dumbbell and move it for reps without moving anything with the elbow, shoulder doesn't move, the spine doesn't move, the hip doesn't move, the knee doesn't move, nothing moves. Your head stays perfectly still, being related to the cervical spine, right? Nothing else moves. That's impressive. To be able to do that for 45, 75 seconds or more, that's impressive. You don't want a lot of assistant movers. Assistant movers mean cheating. Cheating means poor results. You can lift more weight, sure, but you're also getting less benefit to the biceps the more other muscles that are involved, and the more stress is incurred on other joints that is not intended to be the case, whereby you're causing more problems than good, increasing risk, losing benefit. None of these things are good. We start looking at exercise like money, and we're going to refer to this a lot. If If exercise were like money, you wouldn't find the ones that were cool and fun. You'd find the one that gave you the most bang for your buck, the one that gives you the best investment of your money. You wouldn't just do random stuff. Gamblers just gamble because it's fun. A lot of us are gamblers in the weight room. We just love exercise. Don't confuse that with what you should be doing with your money if you don't have a lot of money to spare, like most people with their exercise. That said, antagonist. The triceps are an antagonist. Their primary job is to actually extend the elbow while the biceps are trying to bend that elbow, right? So the antagonist must remain dormant, must remain relaxed, not do anything. If it tries to do its job and contract, what a muscle's job is to do is to shorten. That's what its job is, right? To actually try to handle force, transmit force, right? Or produce force. That said, that antagonist does anything. The triceps do anything. You're not going to get motion at your elbow in flexion. So you don't want the antagonist to do anything. It must remain dormant, quiet, which is why flexibility is such a beneficial thing to be working on too, if needed. Stabilizers. Any muscles or muscles in your body whose job at any moment in time is to help keep you stable, trying to keep you still and not moving while something else is doing its job. While you're standing upright doing an arm curl, there are hundreds of muscles that are doing work trying to keep your spine stable, your hips still, your knee in neutral position there, your ankle fixed as it is so you don't rock on your feet or bend your knees or bend your hips, flex and extend your hips, or bend and rotate your spine or anything like that. There's a lot of muscles that are involved as stabilizers at any given moment in time. And extending that idea, in this exercise here, where it refers to the rolls of muscles on the shoulder joint or the glenohumeral joint, one of 4 different joints at the shoulder technically. During a dumbbell bench press, someone laying on their back, technically laying supine, right, on their back, hips fixed to the bench, spine neutral, shoulders staying where they are. A lot of people bring their hips up off the bench. If we're talking powerlifting, we're talking about a different thing. We're talking about maximizing the benefit to joints and joint stress as far as transmitting benefit to the muscles. You don't want to bring hips off the ground. You don't want to do things that would, for a competition, make sense because you'll want to win. We want to win the game of let's stay healthy, let's get strong and be smart at the same time. Sport and health are not necessarily the same thing, right? In this case, when we actually talk about horizontal adduction, which is the basic horizontal plane motion of the arms coming across in front like a fly, in this case being a press, whereby it's not just a horizontal adduction motion of the shoulder with the arm coming across in front, the elbow is actually straightening as the arm comes up as well, right, with elbow extension. Technically, the prime movers of the elbow will be the triceps. For the shoulder, the primary movers are going to be primarily a pectoralis major, and the secondary movers, or assistant movers, if you will, would be the anterior deltoid, also assisting horizontal adduction. However, if you go really deep, like some people do, in a dumbbell chest press going all the way down, what they'll end up have happening is the pectoralis major becomes actively insufficiently capable of producing force, such that the anterior deltoid takes all of it. It's like having 2 big guys. Well, one guy considerably bigger than the other and bigger and stronger, and carrying a heavy object up the stairs. And the big guy, pectoralis major, takes a break at some moment or just says, I'm not doing anything. There's not much chance that littler guys can be able to handle load very well. It's going to create some serious stress. He may carry the weight just fine, make it through the set, but it's also going to cause unbelievable undue stress long-term, possibly tearing tissue over long-term, creating major joint stress. That's why going to your chest on a bench press makes no sense at all. We want to go only so low as about 100 degrees of motion occur, which we'll talk more about with the hands-on portion when it comes to application of exercise. Stabilizers, rotator cuff. Rotator cuff actually has 4 muscles. Sits, supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, and subscapularis. The rotator cuff muscles together do one simple thing, stabilize the shoulder. That's what they do. Together, they stabilize the shoulder. Separately, they have their own independent functions. But when someone refers to a rotator cuff exercise with a band or standing up or kneeling or however they're doing that, and they've got a cable machine or they're laying on their side with a dumbbell, that's called physical therapy. Okay? That's what a physical therapist should advise someone to do post-operation shoulder surgery as needed, as defined by the physical therapist. Therapist says that, we do it. Physical therapist doesn't say that, we don't do it. It's called wasting time. There are better things to do in the gym, like so many things. There are plenty of ice cream exercises. We all like ice cream. If you like doing something, you should do it. If it didn't hurt you, you should do it. But there are better things to do than those motions for benefit of the stabilizers of the shoulder, the rotator cuff. You perform your motions with fluid, smooth, controlled motion, knowing the proper range of motion, knowing the proper path, having the proper load, having the proper control of that motion throughout the entire range. That's what's going to maximize your stabilizers and maximize the stability strength of the rotator cuff muscle group as a whole, not performing those basic actions that are more toward independent actions that are more post-operation shoulder surgery. That is part 3 of our kinesiology and anatomy video for Training Made Fun. Once again, I've been Mark Baines, and we'll see you for part 4, the final section of kinesiology and anatomy, next.